The African Union celebrates its Golden Jubilee anniversary at a time of huge movement and transformation. Africa is rising, the fastest growing continent in the world. Democracy and improved policy-making have brought about striking advances in economic and social development. There is a new recognition among African leaders that development cannot be achieved without good governance. For the first time, we tell the remarkable story of how Africa's leaders, in partnership with Africa's people, developed the African Peer Review Mechanism, the APRM, to deepen governance. Since 2003, a quiet, profound Pan-African revolution has been underway as the APRM has shaken up politics, redefined the relationship between rulers and ruled, and inaugurated more inclusive and participatory forms of governance. The APRM grew out of the crisis Africa faced at the beginning of the 1990s. The continent was suffering its lost decade of economic stagnation and aid dependency. But the long struggle against colonialism was also ending, with the fall of apartheid in the early 90s. Independence provided the opportunity for rethinking the African Unity and Renaissance project. A group of influential leaders came together, generating two related visions: the New Partnership for Africa's Development, NEPAD, and the APRM.
This has always been at the center of our thinking, of the African thinking, that we get rid of colonialism in order to achieve the Renaissance of Africa. And when this was achieved in South Africa, it seemed clear to us that this then opened the way for the continent to focus on its next task. This next task of the continent was to attend to the matter of its development.
I was chairman of Group of 77 plus China. President Thabo Mbeki was the chairman of Non-Aligned Movement. President Bouteflika was the chairman of OAU. So fortuitously, here were three of us, African leaders.
Parce que Thabo Mbeki est revenu souvent sur ça tout à l'heure quand il est intervenu, pour dire voilà pourquoi les pionniers, les trois premiers Mohicans et les derniers des trois Mohicans d'ailleurs, donc l'Afrique du Sud à travers Thabo Mbeki, le Nigeria à travers Obasanjo et l'Algérie à travers Bouteflika, ont conçu le système comme cela.
There was a lot of talk about how to remove poverty, eliminate poverty in Africa. And the heads of state were aware, at least is how I saw it, that we had to liberate the continent against these evils, poverty, ignorance, and to try and catch up with the progress.
We had to ask ourselves the question, to say, therefore, we need, in the first instance, a partnership among ourselves as Africans. Not only country to country, but also people to people. We need to build this partnership, but also so that we are able to act together as Africans. But also we need to act together as Africans relative to the rest of the world.
There was a talk about governance and, for that matter, about good governance. It was not immediately clear what it was meant by these words good governance.
We believed that would generate the atmosphere that would attract investments, both from within and from without. To do this, we subscribed to rule of law, of course, respecting the independence of the judiciary, respecting fundamental human rights, respecting the private sector as a necessary agency to partner the public sector in unleashing the wealth of Africa.
We are taking our fortune in our hand. In the past, they used to tell us, do this, do it this way. This time, we want to say, this is our program, and that was what happened.
And we said, it's clear that it's important that this state, the African state, which must play an important role in terms of this development, has to be empowered, must be strong enough to play this role. And therefore, we had to say, what is it that would characterize this capable African state? Hence, the peer review mechanism to say, here are the benchmarks which we think would make for the kind of state we're talking about. And indeed, even beyond states, which would make for the kind of society that we need.
With the vision in place, African technocrats, intellectuals, and civil society activists grappled further with the principles underlying the APRM, particularly how to meet the development needs of ordinary Africans.
In the period preceding the APRM processes, we had a structural adjustment program which was introduced by the World Bank and IMF, if one were to say that. And therefore, these were actually externally imposed tools that were meant to scrutinize African governments or review African governments in terms of progress in economic development.
What was happening in Africa in the late 80s, where we had poverty was increasing, growth has slowed down, there was a lot of despondency about Africa's development. And in the discourse, it became very clear that the root causes of all these developments were intertwined. Issues of peace, security, the rule of law, transparency, accountability. And all these factors were then came to be summed up in the concept of governance.
The best thing for Africa in tackling governance is to be able to develop systems and processes that actually come from within Africa. And that's exactly what the APRM sought to do. It was constructed within Africa. It analyzed Africa's problems from the continent's perspective, and it said, we as Africans, and we, not just the leaders, but in fact society, are going to be active participants.
At the same time also, we also felt that if Africans can hold themselves accountable, then we can tell our development partners that this whole issue of conditionality and all that, excessive, intrusive conditionality, was not also consistent with the idea of ownership.
Our commitment to do what is right cannot depend on the fulfillment of promises by the donor community. We should do what we can on our own. And if the donor community comes up and with the resources to help, that would be icing on the cake.
One of the most interesting aspects of APRM is the fact that it associates a number of streams to make the Africa's debate completely different from what it was before. The stream of accountability, the stream of civic engagement, the stream of political responsibility in relation with peers, in relation to others, and also learning from experience.
Il faut dire que l'adhésion au mécanisme africain d'évaluation par les pairs se présente comme une opportunité pour des pays qui font le choix d'y adhérer parce que cette initiative permet aux États qui y adhèrent d'échanger des expériences et de s'auto-évaluer mutuellement pour voir quelles sont les bonnes pratiques qui existent au niveau de chaque État et aussi quelles sont les faiblesses qui existent pour essayer de corriger.
So for the mere fact that there is a peer review mechanism, the mere fact that African governments have agreed among each other with the support of their partners, particularly G7, to start peer reviewing and assessing themselves to look into the inefficiency and effectiveness of governance is a major opening up, a major startup.
It is an outstanding example of what we can do in a process of anchoring good governance, owned and driven by Africans, rather than being externally driven. It is about minimizing investment risks, creating stability and trust.
Le mécanisme africain d'évaluation par les pairs au terme de 10 ans, on se rend compte qu'il a engagé une nouvelle forme de communication entre les gouvernants et les gouvernés. Il a apporté aussi un regard différent des autorités, des gouvernants, des gouvernements, des États sur la gouvernance, sur le concept de gouvernance et sur la nécessité de redevabilité et de reddition de comptes.
Alors, il y a deux types de défis dans l'amélioration de la gouvernance en Afrique. Il y a des défis à la fois au niveau des États eux-mêmes, des sociétés eux-mêmes. Le deuxième défi, c'est sur les instruments d'évaluation, donc à la fois les instruments nationaux et les instruments continentaux sont encore jeunes et nouveaux.
So the shift in paradigm was essentially from what has been called accountability to external actors, whereby because of these conditionalities that were imposed on Africa, countries were obliged to account to external actors and rather to domestic constituencies, citizens and stakeholders who were the real beneficiaries of development.
The structure of the mechanism began taking shape. It would respond to the development needs of ordinary Africans through 4 pillars: democratic and political governance, economic governance, socio-economic development, and corporate governance. On each of these, countries would be offered peer support, peer review, and peer understanding.
Governance has been unpacked into those 4 components, those 4 pillars, under which the definitions have been further unpacked and indicators have been developed. So that we're not talking about governance in a very amorphous way, but we actually have very specific indicators that we're examining.
The major highlight, first of all, is the commitment by heads of states to accept to be peer-reviewed in terms of governance. I think that by itself was a very, very important decision. But they were also very wise. They did not make this obligatory. They left it open. You come in voluntarily if you so wish.
The pressure, I think, essentially came from the peers themselves signing up. And I think the demonstration effect had provided sort of its own gravitational pull, as it were, to draw more and more countries into the process.
It's not a confrontational process. It is a peer persuasion process which in effect compels country to engage with their own constituencies.
Those heads of state who sign up to the mechanism join the APR Forum, which is the highest body.
And of course, in Africa, one of the major issues is the entrepreneurial attitude, which has to be embedded in our youth from the school.
One of the major achievements of the APRM and the source of pride for all of us is that it is a truly organic and homegrown initiative of which we should be proud.
The forum appoints the PEP, a 7-member panel of eminent persons, which oversees the process.
The eminent persons that lead the review process are Africans who have distinguished themselves in careers which are relevant to the APRM process. And these are also persons of high moral stature and who have also demonstrated commitment in the ideals of Pan-Africanism.
The panel then appoints an independent country review team, CRT, that always includes experts from the 3 APR strategic partners: the African Development Bank, the UN Economic Commission for Africa, and the UN Development Programme. The process of review then begins, over 5 stages. Stage 1 involves the preparation of background materials, including country self-assessment reports and the National Programme of Actions.
The most important aspect of the APRM is the national self-assessment process. This national self-assessment process has to be done through multi-stakeholder engagement. They are interviewed, they contribute to the scientific study that's being done. They also have the opportunity to validate the report that comes out, to agree or to disagree with it openly and transparently. That has happened in many countries in many instances.
Stage 2 is the country review mission.
When I first came into contact with the APRM was when South Africa was being reviewed, starting with the self-assessment of the country, of course, the creation of the structures. And we first had to deal with issues of understanding the role players within a society. And in our view as Parliament, we had a very important role to play.
Mais moi, j'ai retenu que quand il y a un regard extérieur, quand des experts viennent et ont la possibilité de rencontrer les populations, effectivement, elles ont la liberté de dire ce qu'elles pensent. Et cela a souvent été retenu, bien sûr, avec la participation de tous les parlementaires, aussi bien de la majorité que de l'opposition. Ce qui m'amène à me résumer pour dire que les recommandations, effectivement, sont des recommandations objectives, sans complaisance.
We had traditional leaders, we had religious leaders, we had the governor of the state of Maiduguri, and we had children, women, all sectors of society. And we had an old man, and he came to one of our meetings, and he spoke in a very moving fashion. He said he has been to all of the founding meetings of the African Organization of African Unity, but this was the most important moment in his life, to meet as an ordinary person, not as a minister, not as a government official, but as an African with other Africans, to listen to the problems that they had. And then we will communicate that to President Yar'Adua in Abuja. Was the most moving, the most wise form of governing and Pan-Africanism spirit that he's ever witnessed.
Stage 3 is the completion and submission of the country report. And Stage 4 is the peer review itself, where the leader of the country under review engages with their fellow heads of state on key findings of the report. They agree a national program of action to correct problems identified.
But equally amazing is what happens at the level of the heads of state behind closed doors. The frank exchange, the issues that concern them, and mutual sharing. I don't think I'm diverging any secrets here when I say that I have seen one head of state say to another, you know, these problems you're having with natural resource governance, we had similar problems, and this is how we addressed them.
Oui, je crois que le mécanisme a été très exemplaire au Burkina parce que si vous regardez aujourd'hui dans la presse nationale, que ce soit l'opposition, que ce soit la majorité, tout le monde se réfère aujourd'hui au rapport du MAEP. Ça veut dire que le rapport a mis quand même le doigt sur des questions de gouvernance qui touchent vraiment la sensibilité des populations.
Case in point, if we look back to as far back as 2006, when the president of Kenya was asked around issues of gender equality, and thereafter he made a pronouncement that for all future appointments that at least 1/3 would need to be women. So we can see that already through the APRM process, there was that call that then the Kenya government heeded. And even just the developments that we have seen in our country, the development of Vision 2030 being highly put on the pillars of the APRM.
I don't think it would have, I don't think without that peer review, we would have thought we are doing very well. Anyway, our constitution talks about this and that, we are doing very well. But we needed somebody, another African country, telling us, Kenya, here you are not doing well. We need to see much more of this. So for me, it is a very good platform.
In the final stage, the report becomes public and is tabled at key institutions, such as the Pan-African Parliament. More than 30 countries have signed up for review. Around half of these have completed the 5-stage review process. Extraordinary stories have emerged as the APRM spotlight has fallen on different countries. The idea that African countries and their citizens can learn from each other and share best practices is a unique feature of the mechanism. In Mozambique, nearly 3 decades of civil war cost 1 million lives. The war ended only after a series of negotiations led by prominent Africans, religious groups, and the international community. The transition from war to peace in Mozambique was considered a model for the management and ending of conflicts.
I think the story of Mozambique is a story to be shared because it's a beautiful one. When we reached peace, what happened was, let's get on with the work of rebuilding the nation. So we engaged in a process called turning swords into plowshares, which was to invite the people who had got guns to bring them.
The idea of this project was to melt the guns after we destroy, but Mozambique doesn't have a condition to melt this material. So we decided to transform, to put together the creativity of artists as a way of civic education or as a way of dissemination of peace culture.
This is magazine for M3. This is part of AK-47. This is like very automatic weapon. This is the man of the mortar. And here I'm just using, this is the base of a big machine gun, and this is the mortar as part of this work.
A gun is never meant to be in our hands. Can you imagine the way people waste time making a gun, thinking about the shape, the size, the weight, the color, an instrument to kill human beings.
Kenya, East Africa's largest economy and most stable country, erupted into violence after disputed presidential elections in 2007. As the world watched, African leaders raced back and forth to broker a ceasefire and negotiate peace. The earlier 2006 APRM country review raised the alarm about mounting ethnic tensions, but was ignored.
In terms of the forecasting that was done before the 2007 elections, I think unfortunately we had a government that did not heed a lot of warnings, not only the warnings from the APRM, but also from intelligence sources, as we have seen now through various commissions that have looked back at what had gone wrong. And I think that is a point for us to learn from, that we should not wish away or ensure that we have institutions that cannot adequately respond.
In 2010, the country ushered in a new constitution, widely considered to be one of the most progressive on the continent. Civil society participation in the earlier APRM report and later in the drafting of the new constitution ensured that the concerns of ordinary Kenyans were heard.
Definitely in Kenya, the constitution is key to improved governance. It is the framework that guides all Kenyans. It's the framework that guides government on terms of how to deal with citizens. It's the framework that really brings together the three arms of government and holds them to account.
Despite the warnings, there's always the common feeling that it cannot really be as serious as it's been put. But I think we've learned our lessons. We know now when not to take things for granted anymore on the side of citizens, and we do know when to say action needs to be taken.
Elections 5 years later passed off peacefully, and the country is due for a second APRM review.
I and my friends believe this is a turning point in the life of Kenyans. We are on to something very special, new and better.
South Africa's post-apartheid constitution was designed to remove inequalities and ensure that every citizen had access to services at all levels of society. But frustration with the slow pace of service delivery and unequal distribution of wealth has manifested itself in xenophobic attacks.
Another major issue coming out of our review is the whole issue of follow-up, given the recommendations that came up. So, for instance, around the issue of xenophobia, the report did flag the potential threats to governance in that respect. And I think if the agency with which the report had flagged that issue had been taken on board by the relevant authorities, what we saw happening in 2007, 2008 could have been avoided.
There's a lot of people without water, electricity and housing.
We like to see service delivery, sanitation, we like to see better education, a health sector.
The opinion that communities around the country, through sometimes violent and certainly active protests, seems to be expressing is that they're not satisfied with the pace of the provision of service delivery in the country. So I think that service delivery continues to be something that is provided for within the Constitution, which is a very progressive Constitution. But I think we as South Africans today continue to grapple with the challenge of how to actualize the Constitution, to make the Constitution a living document that is experienced by South Africans on a daily basis.
Equitable participation of citizens in development and democratic processes have been identified as central to growth in Africa. In 1994, attempts to eliminate members of the Tutsi community and moderate Hutus produced the horrors of the Rwandan genocide. Rwanda has since recovered, aiming to rebuild itself on a model that ensures participation and representation for all. Today, Rwanda has the highest number of women in parliament in the world, with systems that ensure women's participation at all levels of decision-making.
We have the highest number of women represented in parliament. Our laws here prohibit us from giving people work or responsibility without ensuring gender representation, because 30% in every decision-making organ at any level in the country, from the lowest to highest, has to have minimum of 30% women representation. And this is followed like it's the law, it's like the Bible.
There's also a high number of women leaders in government, PSs, ministers. That already is a huge thing. You see that it's not just men, it's women as well. It's, I don't know, it's encouraging, it's inspiring. You feel represented in government.
Mbona ari byiza kuko n'abandi bagore nyine baba bumva bashyigikiwe na bagenzi babo. Ubu nta kibazo bakigira cyane nk'ibyo bahoranye kera.
Rwanda, like many other countries, is a patriarchal kind of system where the men dominate. And so even when we try to include all this in the laws and policies, to put it, into action, we still have gaps.
Edwuma na yele no sahoma boyan na oyeye ya na hia no so yetumi ye de ne sika ne bi aboto ban ama so obi so hia bosia na hom da abo am wada bi abo amama da dam cooperative e bia ye 1 billion wo ho won so wada ba another company bi bosia na no so nya sika na say.
We believe that women's participation is crucial, not only that in a country like Ghana where they make up more than 51% of the population and we are in the majority, and the fact that we play a crucial role in all sectors of the economy.
Apa no nya da mama ya na abrinyi na odeba lole na we je megu onsan nya adwuma ni bi mesi afono nso se adwuma no okodo a ebi ti da wa ton en fish o wa ton tomatoes ni nyina akodo a eyi chop mun na wo kogoma bibia ya fu go se adwuma no nkodo a onye sika ne nya adwuma every time bia adwuma no baba mpo na obi anya because onye sika.
I think that the issue of women's participation and representation is a key one because all policies are made within formal structures of the governance system, and therefore if you are not represented, if your voice is not heard, then what it means is that the issues that are of concern to you may not be addressed. So that is the struggle that we are involved in.
In Ghana, Burkina Faso, and Rwanda, traditional systems of government and conflict resolution have been adapted to help governments resolve local disputes.
Rwanda's Gitarama prison in the capital Kigali has achieved world notoriety because of the conditions inmates are forced to live in. It is one of 13 in the country, which now holds the world record for prison overcrowding.
We realized 3 years down the road that it was going to take probably 300 years to run through the bulk of cases we had. And so how are you going to tell Rwandans, genocide survivors, or the Rwandans who are in prison, that they are going to wait for 300 years, or call it 100 years if you like, before they get justice? So that's when Gacaca, a traditional Rwandan judicial system that existed even before the colonialists, was pulled back from our history, brought to our present, where people of integrity would sit down, listen to a problem, and take out punishment. But at the end of it, the whole message was punish the culprit, but reconcile the culprit with the victim. That was the philosophy behind Gacaca. Our judicial reforms have enabled us to introduce what we call mediation committees in our laws, who work almost in the same way as Gacaca. They're elected by the population for a 5-year mandate. The responsibility is to judge certain cases, both civil and criminal, that are provided for by the law. Other countries can learn from this. They can practice it.
Ah oui, vous savez que ici au Burkina, bien avant les administrations modernes, bien avant les administrations coloniales, il y avait chez nous une forme d'administration basée sur la monarchie coutumière.
Je prends par exemple une valeur très importante au Burkina Faso, c'est la parenté à plaisanterie. Ça fait que plusieurs peuples ritualisent en quelque sorte ce qui pourrait être un peu identifié à des conflits, mais sous forme de plaisanterie. Donc ça fait que vous ne pouvez pas aller jusqu'au bout, j'allais dire, d'une adversité, parce que quelque part, même si entre vous et moi, il n'y a pas cette parenté à plaisanterie, il y a peut-être cette parenté qui est établie entre vous et une autre communauté qui pourrait donc intervenir comme, j'allais dire, un arbitre.
Let me make this point. Chieftaincy in Ghana is so deep-rooted. I mean, it's deeply entrenched. It is a very elaborate institution in the sense that there is no village in Ghana that you will not find a chief, starting from the capital town Accra down to the most rural village.
Traditionally, the duty of a chief is to mobilize the youth of the community towards development projects. We do it this way. We have sub-chiefs. Sub-chief will meet with the youth of his area and plan the essential needs of developmental projects.
We have gone quite far in sending the APRM message to the people by establishing the district oversight committees all over the 170 administrative districts of Ghana.
The District Oversight Committee of the African Peer Review Mechanism helps the Governing Council to implement the program of action of the African Peer Review Mechanism. We are on the ground. We are the chain between the Governing Council and the grassroots.
You are welcome to APRM Community Co-Store. It's a building that was actually put up by the District Assembly under the Social Investment Fund, Urban 2 Poverty Reduction Strategy of the government. This machine was installed in January to produce ice for the people of APRM. Hitherto they buy ice from Accra and Elmina to use in storing their fish from sea. And they saw the need that they could also help in other way in order to improve on the economic empowerment of all the people within the area, improving their living standards, giving them ready market also for their produce, and also helping them to take care of their basic health.
Health and the provision of quality care to citizens remain one of the biggest challenges for governments across the continent. In Mozambique, the government has won plaudits for its success in dealing with AIDS. Further north, back in Rwanda, the Vision 2020 provides ambitious targets for healthcare. By rolling out basic health and education services at local levels throughout their countries, both Mozambique and Rwanda prove that with planning and the right systems, development goals can be met.
Our role is to enhance citizen satisfaction or to enhance better service delivery to the people. People will tell you in terms of service decentralization, over 90%, 96% of what they need is being accessed at sector, cell, and village level.
Rwanda has been able to put in place policies and strategies that make it possible to see that the maternal mortality rates and infant mortality rates go down.
Et nous avons ce qu'on appelle les agents de santé communautaires qui sont au niveau le plus bas et qui sont en train de mobiliser la communauté, qui sont en train de pousser les mamans à aller faire des accouchements au niveau du centre de santé. Avant, c'était à 22%. Actuellement, on est à 70% des accouchements au niveau des formations sanitaires. Pour augmenter le nombre d'accès aux services de santé, et lorsqu'on a commencé avec la mutuelle de santé, avec 1 000 francs par personne, aujourd'hui c'est 3 000, parce que quand même les frais coûtent cher. La population a vu que c'était le seul moyen de pouvoir se soigner sans payer beaucoup.
Eu gostaria de dizer que, ainda sobre o impacto, eu falei da juventude e gostaria de referir que ela constitui a nossa grande preocupação, porque constitui o alvo principal de pessoas entre os 15 aos 49 anos, incide sobre os jovens. E na juventude incide mais na jovem rapariga. Nós temos cerca de 11,5% em relação à rapariga e 3,7% em relação aos rapazes jovens. este é um cenário que nos preocupa.
Sou Elis Antônio Maísa, sou daqui em Maputo, tenho 26 anos, tenho 2 filhas. Comecei a fazer o tratamento no DREAM em 99, que já tenho 13 anos a fazer o tratamento. Mudou, porque quando fui para o DREAM, fui lá já em 2002, tive lá um aconselhamento. Quando mandou para lá o padre, comecei já em Benfica. Fui ter o aconselhamento com Roque, tive o aconselhamento e comecei a fazer o tratamento de gravidez e bebê ao mesmo tempo. E lá tive palestra, fui aprendendo. Passou 2 anos, a doutora Jana me convidou para ser ativista do DREAM. Comecei lá também a aprender, fazer palestra e a dar aconselhamento também às pessoas.
Temos que fazer o tratamento dos bebês, temos que fazer durante a gravidez, temos que fazer o tratamento Um dos grandes sucessos do nosso programa tem a ver com o facto de nós termos acreditado que a descentralização da resposta era o melhor caminho para moçambicanizar a resposta ao HIV-Sida. Eu penso que este foi um dos sucessos que nós conseguimos atingir. Mas antes desse, eu penso que Moçambique teve o privilégio de ter uma liderança política aos vários níveis.
Decidi porque vi que era importante porque eles vão transmitindo mais pessoas, dar informação a outras pessoas que não têm conhecimento. Quase decidi assim que podia dar, assim.
Burkina Faso suffers many of the challenges faced by semi-arid countries in Africa. Managing scarce resources, water in particular, is a recurring challenge for development. The APRM Country Review report hailed Burkina Faso for its water control strategy, originally designed in 1983 to improve access to drinking water and sanitation.
Il faut dire que ici au Burkina, on se situe dans un contexte où véritablement la ressource eau est rare. Nous sommes un pays sahélien, un pays enclavé et qui est vulnérable aux fluctuations climatiques. Et ce barrage justement sert à l'approvisionnement en eau potable de la ville de Ouagadougou et c'est l'ONEA qui est en charge de cet approvisionnement en eau potable-là.
Il faut dire que ces performances sont le fruit d'une volonté politique affirmée des autorités politiques dans le cadre de la réforme entreprise, comme je vous le disais, dans les années 1994. Et la réforme a voulu transformer l'entreprise pour qu'elle réponde à sa mission de prestataire du service public d'eau.
Two-thirds of Algeria's income is derived from hydrocarbon extraction and refinement. This heavy reliance on one industry has meant that the country has in the past been subject to price fluctuations. In the year 2000, the government set up the Fund for the Regulation of Receipts to insulate the Algerian economy from volatility in gas and oil prices. The fund provides resources for important social and development programs, including the Observatory on the Employment of Women and the Algerian Scholarship Program for Africa.
Algeria gives a scholarship to most of the African countries, Lusophones, Francophones, and Anglophones too. So in my case, I'm Anglophone. I got this scholarship from the Algerian government to come and study here, finance, and I came.
Qu'on a en face, c'est le défi de la diversification de l'économie nationale. Oui, diversifier l'économie algérienne pour créer plus d'emplois en direction d'une population jeune, de plus en plus jeune et diplômée, pour permettre à l'entreprise de créer de la valeur ajoutée de plus en plus et pour booster l'économie nationale.
The problem with this fund is visibility. It has to do with the governance of this fund. We want this fund used in a more valued way. People need to sit with experts. People need to sit and discuss with the community, with the business community, with the civil society, to came out with a solution that reduces the tension now, but is a sustainable solution.
I think cooperation between African countries is a very good thing. It will help us develop, take us a step further in development, learning about different cultures, because you never know what you learn from another person.
I would want to see Africans stand up upright, confident. On our own as Africans, we can stand. On our own, we don't need to wait for other people to confirm what we do. Most Africans remain unaware of the APRM. Financing operations, institutional capacity, and difficulties with implementation continue to impinge on the way the APRM works.
We want to review the review globally. 10 years we have carried out this task. What have we achieved in those 10 years? Where have we gone?
African member states have to be honest with themselves that the peer review, okay, it's fine. We know the gap is the first step. We accept to review ourselves and we close the door and we see what is good and what is bad.
I want private sector element to now be brought in strongly in the formulation of the APR itself. Is just the idea of knowing that the community that you want to see benefit are really sensitized enough to understand what we are doing and really buy in, become your own real partners. Give them the ownership.
I think the biggest threat to the mechanism, in my mind, is the institutional and organizational frameworks that guide the mechanism as a continent. They ought to be strengthened, they ought to be improved, and in some ways they ought to be even reformed to make it more friendly in terms of efficiency.
In the review process, a huge set of data is also generated. And this data has to be put to use. The data that the APRM process has generated brings out invaluable knowledge. And therefore, there should be an evidence-based policy making by countries which can move the APRM process much forward.
And I think that it's going to be very important for the APRM to really track its own influence within the governance reform agenda. There are many other initiatives coming through right now through the African Union Charter on democracy and elections and governance. I think that's going to be a very interesting dynamic to see what role for the APRM within the African governance architecture. And I think we're going to need to see what value does the APRM add in this discussion. If we can't point to that in 10 years' time, then I suspect that the APRM will become largely irrelevant in the future.
If it can re-energize itself and become and show its real value to African people, then I would see it as a really important mechanism defining the nature of governance and also helping the process of integration, strengthening integration on the continent.
And I think it's incumbent on the current generation of leaders, particularly of well-endowed, strong states, and those that were instrumental in finding us and creating for us the African Union, in consultation with people in civil society, to really reclaim their responsibility, show leadership, leave petty differences amongst themselves, and restore the credibility of these continental institutions.
The issue of funding determines the priorities that are accorded to these development agendas across the board. So you can have a whole range of development agendas, and some of them die out in practice and others stay afloat. And unfortunately, money is one of the factors that contributes to this process.
The idea that it is optional disturbs me a little bit as an African. It compromises when Africa makes a claim that we can find African solutions to African problems. Because what does it say about why it is voluntary? I would like that discussion opened up. What are the reasons for this voluntarism? Because then I think it tones down the thrust of the APRM, and we are leaving too many African problems unresolved.
Well, I think that is a passing phenomenon. You know, we are now at 31 countries in Africa. That's above half. When you get to 40, then those who are not part of the process will start looking as if there's something wrong with them. And maybe there is, but let's get to that point. I'm not worried about those who are staying out. I'm worried about those who are on the boat, and I'm hoping that they get what they came for.
My call as an African scholar has been a moratorium on ending norm setting, on producing new policies, new treaties, new conventions, and focus and use all of the resources to implement these policies. So the message has to be implementing the APRM reports based on that.
Repeatedly, APRM reports have flagged the issue of electoral systems design. But time and again, countries go back to use the same system where then elections are disputed. And if they had taken on board the recommendations coming out of the APRM on an issue such as electoral systems in place, they would have started electoral reforms. And we think there is need for collective pressure that will make those who are supposed to undertake those reforms to do so.
The APRM understandably highlighted the moment when the peers, that is the presidents, reviewed one another. But this is a bit like making the highlight of a menu the point where the chef goes and buys all the ingredients and tells you writes down what the ingredients are and how they're going to prepare it. The food has not yet been cooked. Yes? The highlight of the APRM should be the completion of the National Program of Action, because that is what is important.
We have to take the peer review, the APRM, deeper to the levels of towns and villages, and so that it goes beyond the educated people who, are talking about democratization and sustainability of development and using language of that sort.
Well, I think one of the first things that we have to do as focal point members is actually to sell the idea of the APRM more vigorously, more robustly, so that every citizen of Africa understands that we are here working for them, working to ensure that we provide them with better governance. And when they have ownership of it, then half the problem is done.
The first 10 years of the APRM have seen unprecedented progress in governance. The APRM has been identified as a powerful, transformative tool, and yet it is largely unknown by ordinary Africans, needs more resources, and requires compliance with recommendations. The challenge for the next 10 years is to build on the successes, apply the lessons learned, and to make the APRM more effective for the benefit of every African.
Donc c'est vraiment un outil qui appartient aux Africains. Il est fait par des Africains. Il concerne des Africains. Je crois que c'est une conquête des Africains. C'est le reflet de la conscience autocritique des populations africaines. Et je crois que si les pères fondateurs de l'Afrique ont rêvé d'une Afrique, c'est celle-là, d'une Afrique démocratique, d'une Afrique pour tout le monde, d'une Afrique juste, d'une Afrique riche, d'une Afrique sublime, d'une Afrique où les Africains prennent en main leur destinée.
Well, I think the founding fathers, they had an agenda, they had a vision for this continent. And I think we have moved. Let me not say that we have moved quite far. And I would want to see us move in a much faster pace, because 50 years is a long time where we should have seen this Pan-Africanism everywhere in Africa. But it has not happened, but I think we are going to get there.
In fact, I think it's the most effective instrument for our Pan-African integration. If we are thinking about democracy, we're thinking about democratic governance, and we are thinking about integration to the extent that we'll be able to close our gaps and learn more about ourselves. I think is the APRM, that is the instrument that fosters it.
The last 10 years have seen a dramatic turnaround in Africa's economic fortunes. We must now emphasize quality of growth and sustainability. Policies of inclusive development, of which there are already many best practices. These are central. Learning from our own experiences, comparing notes, and taking corrective measures in the whole policy arena is what the APRM is all about.
Comment en fait travailler plus groupé, plus condensé, plus effet de synthèse, plus accélération du processus, avec pratiquement les mêmes moyens et peut-être avec moins de moyens. Parce que les ressources, elles sont là, réparties à travers tout le territoire de l'Afrique. Et même au-delà de l'Afrique, dans notre diaspora.
The African peer review system should not be treated as incidental. That you do everything else, and when you've done whatever, in your spare time you say, well, what about the African peer review? I think it has to be integral. It has to be integral to everything that we do every day.
Now, we have made tremendous progress. And what do we need to do? We need to do more of the good things that we have done. And we need to make sure that when these good things are done, they are done for a purpose. And what is the purpose? To make Africa a continent that will be regarded as one that is making life better for all its people.
Ni do